At this very moment, the Ukrainian Armed Forces struck where the Russians least expected it. The Azov coastline on the horizon, a fierce liberation of Ukrainian territories. Unexpectedly, Luhansk and Donetsk. It's on. China is cutting off Russian regions. Washington has finally managed to sway Beijing to its side. Putin is tearing his hair out. The betrayal of the year. The Kremlin's air power is now powerless. Our strike clipped the enemy's wings live on air. An epic failure. The bunker dweller can't contain himself. A response for the strikes on allied Iran. War within NATO is about to begin. Lithuania is sounding the alarm, the earth is trembling. Budanov roasted Putin on the frying pan of negotiations. The Kremlin definitely won't get away with this unscathed. Our plan, which will knock the ground out from under the enemy, is already on the table. All this in our episode Hellpoint. Urgent news from the front. Ukrainian forces have gone all in and launched intense pressure on the occupiers' positions. The Russian defensive line is bursting at the seams. Shock. A target has been identified. The Sea of Azov is already looming on the strategic horizon. Luhansk, Donetsk, and Crimea are already in contact. A triumphant return home. Is the southern operation really entering the home stretch? And could the frontline map soon be turned upside down? We're figuring it out right now.
The armed forces of Ukraine cannot be stopped. Our defenders have launched a counteroffensive. In an instant, the Russian front collapsed and the occupiers began to flee, abandoning more and more of the territories they had previously seized. In
total, over the course of 2 months this year, as we can see, about 400 square kilometers of territory have been liberated.
Recently, the focus of the Ukrainian forces has shifted to the rear areas of the Russians on the occupied territories. Last week became one of the most successful in terms of the geographic spread of strikes inflicted on the enemy.
To illustrate this point more clearly, let us take a closer look at the specific examples provided by our own internal research and development team right here.
Aviation and HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems are striking enemy positions, infantry, and equipment of the occupiers in the Oleksandrivka direction. The Russian invaders have absolutely no chance of surviving such a massive strike. And this is already the Zaporizhzhia direction. Here, a Kasta radar station was destroyed by Ukrainian drone systems. The geography of strikes during the Ukrainian Armed Forces counteroffensive is impressive. Our defenders are managing to strike not only along the front line, but also behind enemy lines. Recently, Mariupol and Yalta have also been hit. Explosions there do not cease. The Ukrainian armed forces are striking barracks, ammunition depots, deployment sites, and air defense assets. We
know that about a month ago the commander was there. General Syrskyi said that defensive measures alone would not solve the issue. In this war, and at the very least, it must be active. This means that counterattacks are being carried out in certain areas.
It looks like it will be a hot week for the occupiers in Tokmak and the surrounding areas. The occupied city is under such heavy fire for the first time. It was here, before the strikes began, that the largest concentration of Russian rear reserves for offensives, maneuvering, and attacks along the line was gathered.
Located at the very front. By strategically advancing from the north to the south, the primary objective of this maneuver is to successfully get behind the Russian group that is currently operating to the west of Mariupol.
There is no peace for Putin's army even in Crimea. There, Ukrainian defense forces struck a hangar in Yevpatoria where Russian troops stored and serviced multi-purpose drones. Forepost and Orion. By the way, the excellent effectiveness of the Ukrainian Armed Forces strikes is due, among other things, to Ukrainian partisans who secretly operate in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine as well as the URF.
Pro-Ukrainian residents, who were the first to reclaim space in the territory of war-torn, occupied Crimea, put up various Ukrainian flags and Ukrainian symbols tied with yellow ribbons. Later, this resistance grew. They began to report not only military coordinates of movements, but also resistance movements themselves provided military coordinates and military data.
Their intelligence is invaluable, and each new act of sabotage becomes a personal slap in the face for the Kremlin and Putin. In
the Klino district of the Moscow region, agents of Atesh destroyed a Livin mobile satellite communication complex. And
our partisans carry out such attacks regularly.
Members of the movement say that it was precisely their actions and the information they gathered that made it possible. Ukrainian strikes on Crimea. Of course, according to Atesh, it was they who directed the Ukrainian missile strike on the Russian landing ship and submarine, Minsk and Rostov-on-Don, as well as the attack on the headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Fleet in September 2023.
And now Ukrainian partisans from the resistance are paralyzing a key railway in Luhansk, which has dealt a serious blow to the supply lines of the Pokrovsk group of the Russian Armed Forces. Currently, the partisans are actively assisting our defenders with the spring counteroffensive.
They united and are carrying out active actions as part of the partisan movement. Specifically in the military sphere, they conduct sabotage operations at military facilities, and also they carry out terrorist acts, so-called eliminating occupation officials both in newly occupied territories and in the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea. They are also actively engaged in gathering and transmitting military information.
It is precisely this information that allows the armed forces of Ukraine to deliver precise strikes against enemy groups.
According to their reports, they deliver detailed intelligence reports about strategic air defense, ammunition depots, military bases, and significant troop movements, sometimes carefully observing these targets for many weeks.
In addition, our partisans in Donbass and Crimea are actively laying the groundwork for the liberation of the regions seized by Putin. Thanks to their work, the occupiers never feel at ease. Not in Donetsk, not in Mariupol, nor on the territory of the Crimean Peninsula. And with the inevitable advance of the armed forces of Ukraine at the front, the fear among Russians only grows.
Brothers and sisters, the military movement Atesh is preparing to liberate Crimea from the Rushists. We are waiting for the armed forces of Ukraine in Jankoy. We have created dozens of caches with weapons, explosives, and ammunition. As soon as the armed forces of Ukraine cross the administrative border with Crimea, we will seize administrative buildings and military facilities.
An urgent and unexpected slap from China. Xi Jinping has officially traded Putin for Trump. Money works wonders. The US oil bait is about to work. There is hysteria erupting in Moscow. You have to see this. The Celestial Empire has outplayed Russia. The Far East has suddenly become a bargaining chip in the big game. It seems Beijing is launching its own scenario, and the former friendship between the dictators is cracking right before our eyes. The Kremlin can't believe such a turn of events, and the propagandists are already openly nervous. Does this mean that Moscow will be forced to play by China's rules? More on this ahead. Russia and China are talking more and more about a friendship without limits. Moscow calls Beijing its main strategic partner. But now a new geopolitical game called Russian oil is beginning around this friendship.
And for Russian-Chinese relations, this may be true. One could faithfully say that no matter the season, it is always spring.
The beginning of April, Trump is preparing his visit to China. And it is precisely there that the US is considering the possibility of asking Xi to reduce purchases of oil from Russia, instead to buy more American oil.
But it is impossible to imagine that the loss of Russian oil volumes would maintain normal conditions in the global energy sector, in the world economy.
Most likely, a decline in oil export volumes will lead to a downturn in the Russian economy. But no matter how you look at it, today China remains one of the largest buyers of this oil. Moreover, Putin is selling it to his friend at favorable discounts.
As for Vladimir Putin, he simply has no other viable option available to him right now. If something truly significant does happen within China and they suddenly decide to stop buying, things will certainly get very bad for him very quickly. Of course, it makes absolutely no sense for China to refuse this arrangement, at least as of today. I honestly don't see what Donald Trump could possibly offer that would be enough to make China refuse.
At the same time, in the West, it is increasingly said that China has a serious influence on the Russian economy, and therefore can use this influence in politics as well.
But, this war is actually being fully supported by China. And China could call Vladimir Putin and end this war as soon as tomorrow by stopping the supply of dual-use technologies that it sells.
Beijing is gradually expanding its economic presence even in regions that were previously considered Russia's sphere of influence, for example, in the countries of Central Asia.
China is increasing its influence in Central Asia. In Kazakhstan, it is ready to build a nuclear power plant. In Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, it seeks to take over the automobile markets. In Tajikistan, it is claiming the mining industry.
China is investing in roads, railways, and infrastructure. Today, it is already the largest trading partner for.
This phenomenon is not limited to just a few places. It is actually observed in many countries across the entire globe. From the nations of North and South America to the diverse regions of Europe, Africa, and Asia, this represents a truly international trend that impacts a vast majority of the world's populations and geographic territories today. If earlier this was noticeable only to those who closely studied these countries, of course, it was Russia's influence. It is still felt, but it decreases with each passing year.
Since we've already mentioned the no limits friendship, this is exactly about how China is strengthening its position even within Russia itself, especially in the Far East. And it seems that the Russians themselves don't really like it.
And the Chinese have long been saying, look, Baikal is ours. I'm telling you, that's right. Soon they'll say Crimea is ours too. They're already using all our resources, gold, coal, oil, gas. They use everything. They're a global power, and we live in poverty.
Although the funniest thing is that it's Russia itself inviting Chinese companies, counting on investment and regional development.
Putin has brought a lot of old Soviet jokes to life. There was this old Soviet joke. The night on the Finnish-Chinese border passed quietly. That's Putin for you. He's moving at an accelerated pace toward making that joke a reality. And undoubtedly, as of today, Russia depends on China in every respect.
Interestingly, there is already panic within Russia. Russian media are claiming that China supposedly intends to reclaim its territories. In
Chinese history textbooks very often mention that almost all of Siberia, including the western part up to Tomsk Oblast, are temporarily lost Chinese lands. And
here it seems Xi has decided to play by the Kremlin's rules. After all, Putin also likes to tie everything to history, Chinese.
Many companies are highly active in the Siberian and Far Eastern regions. The Chinese are actively establishing settlements across these vast territories and extracting the valuable natural resources.
So is this actually the case? The reported official transfer of vast Russian territories to China is...
Could it really be just a simple matter of time before we see this unfold? When we consider the current situation, it seems increasingly likely that the final outcome is inevitable. We are watching a process that appears to be moving steadily toward its conclusion, leaving us to wonder exactly when the anticipated results will finally become a reality for everyone involved. This expansion of Chinese commercial interests is, in many places across the globe, simply becoming absolutely comprehensive.
It seems that the policy of the Celestial Empire is quite simple. Everyone just chooses what is most beneficial for themselves, and it doesn't matter whether Putin is involved or not.
If someone isn't getting in the way here, well, okay, we'll make use of it for now, and then we'll see what happens next. If it's profitable, we'll stay in some kind of relationship. If it's not profitable, we'll move on. And
let Putin keep living in his rosy dreams about having a reliable partner in the form of China. In reality, though, Beijing acts according to its own logic, taking resources, technology, and investments. But it never takes risk for the sake of someone else's interests.
A swarm of drones strikes a top Russian target, a simultaneous attack from both sea and air. The Russians are in shambles, a fire show that sends chills down your spine. Putin's aviation has fallen to its knees again. The epic moment of reckoning has arrived. Ukrainian forces are clipping the wings of the Russian army. Now this is truly the end. In Moscow, they're trying to hide the fact they've run out of pilots. Could it be that Putin's generals are forced to give up their air force? Be the first to know.
On the night of March 5th, the Ukrainian Navy, together with Special Operations Forces units, struck the Sivash drilling platform in the Black Sea, where Russian units were stationed.
This platform was used by the enemy as an observation post, a communications relay point, and a site for deploying electronic warfare and short-range air defense systems, with the purpose of controlling strike UAVs that targeted infrastructure in the Odessa and Mykolaiv regions and posed a threat to civilian shipping. As a result of the combat operations carried out by maritime unmanned drones and aerial unmanned vehicles, enemy command and communication assets were struck, and significant personnel losses were inflicted. Ukrainian Navy of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
In a recent operation, Ukrainian forces also successfully destroyed a Russian Ka-27 helicopter, while it was attempting to land on the offshore platform of a strategic drilling rig.
We regularly drive the Russians out of there as part of our plan, but this time events unfolded much more dramatically for them. Because now, even if someone is still left on one of those platforms, they will have to wait a long time for evacuation, and it will be complicated precisely because the landing pad is now occupied by the destroyed helicopter.
The specialized units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces successfully deployed a wide array of sophisticated tactical means, advanced drone technology, autonomous unmanned surface boats, as well as various strategic air assets to achieve their objectives. The approach was carefully planned, taking into account what weapons were there, including the presence of the helicopter. By the way, it was shot down as it was landing, and the equipment there was damaged because they used that tower for both relaying signals and electronic warfare suppression and so on.
2 weeks ago, the Defense Forces destroyed 2 more Russian helicopters with strike drones, a multi-purpose Mi-8 and an attack K-52. The Russian birds were attacked at the Pugachovka airfield in the Ural region.
It is likely that the Russians are using this site as an operational airfield for a consolidated helicopter unit tasked with intercepting Ukrainian long-range UAVs. The destroyed Mi-8 multi-purpose helicopter, tail number 53, belonged to the 319th Separate Helicopter Regiment, which is based in Chernihivka, Primorsky Krai, Russia. The Ka-52 Alligator attack helicopter, tail number 18, belonged to the 16th Army Aviation Brigade, which is located in Zernograd, Rostov Oblast.
Ukrainian systematic attacks on airfields and locations where Russian aviation is based have shown that the occupiers have serious problems. A shortage of pilots. Ukrainian forces are increasingly succeeding in striking Russian aircraft right on the ground. In other words, the Kremlin simply doesn't have enough pilots to redeploy both planes and helicopters. The effectiveness of Ukrainian drone strikes has also increased significantly.
Preemptive actions are more effective than, trying to deal with these assets once they're already in the air. And we can see this thanks to technological advancements, the adoption of new types of weaponry, the modernization of old ones, and the training of crews.
According to open sources, the deaths of about 110 fighter jet pilots and more than 150 attack and transport helicopter pilots have been confirmed. That is, the total losses among military pilots since the beginning of the full-scale invasion amount to at least 260 pilots. And this does not include accidents and incidents that have occurred with Russian aviation on the territory of Russia itself.